Hello, and welcome to Wildly Curious, a podcast where we tell you everything you need to know about nature and probably more than you wanted to know. I'm Laura, and Katie's not here. It's just me and Sarah. And I am delighted to have Sarah Oster on the podcast today, a longtime friend and food scientist. And today, we are going to talk about how you can stay healthy and not get food poisoning over the holidays, which is always a pleasant experience. To not get food poisoning. I'm going to introduce Sarah, and then we'll get into the meat of it and talk about food science. You can laugh. It's funny.
That's funny. I'm funny.
That's funny. Okay, so Sarah, we've been friends since 9th grade in high school, and we're both scientists. We both are curious people. And I was like, we haven't had Sarah on the podcast yet, and who knows more about food than my food scientist friend Sarah.
You mean
Sarah,
the person that you call all the time whenever
literally,
you have
if I'm like, actually, it's just whenever I'm feeling anxiety about my food. Is what it is. Should I eat it?
Should I eat it? Probably not.
Is this can okay? Yeah. The answer is just usually probably not, and I just need somebody to tell me that and make me feel less crazy. So Sarah has her background in biology from Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania, and then some continuing ed, and she has over 10 years of experience as a food scientist, including everything from a tech to managerial roles and quality control and some other stuff. And before you're like, what even is a food scientist? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's going to be one of our first questions.
I love it. Everyone, when I tell them, I'm like, I'm a food scientist, they're like, oh, so you can cook. I'm like, no, I can't, actually. I'm not very good at that.
Well, right. You're like, okay, no, that's a chef.
Yeah, like that's culinary arts.
You create new foods? Nope, not really that
Sometimes,
either.
but not really.
So before we go into the food safety part and the majority of what we're going to be talking today, I want the listeners to get to know the Sarah that I know. They won't.
They won't get it. They won't get it.
What made you, let's go back to the beginning. What influenced you to become a scientist, and in particular a food scientist? Like, of all the science you could have done, what made you think food?
That's it. I think I had a lot of different interests when I was younger on science. I kind of liked a bunch of different things. We were on Envirothon together, so I mean,
yep.
I've always had interest in science in general and critical thinking. But basically, when I was in my senior year of college, I kind of was like, now what do I do? Like, what's next for me? I did do some undergraduate internships with the Department of Ag at the Bureau of Labs. So that helped me. I was in their water quality lab.
Oh, yes.
So you're like, what? I was like, yeah, I did. So yeah, we did water quality testing, and I used to do that for Renfrew too in our old town.
Yeah.
So that kind of was where it started with water quality stuff, and then it kind of grew into, okay, well, I was thinking about going into med tech, but I'm petrified of drawing like blood and needles.
Needles? Yeah. That would be a hard thing to overcome.
So it kind of was like, well, what about food science? And, I wanted to be able to help a lot of people, and everybody eats. So
Everybody eats, and everybody
and I mainly focused on the microbial aspect of food. And that's where my main focus was. But I still...
the cool stuff anyway, really.
Right, yeah. Microbiology has always been
dark side of food.
Yeah. Well, it's the good side, too, because I've done research with probiotics, too. And probiotics are a big, huge thing with healthy food, too. So
yeah, we talked about on the podcast before about, like, how we are more bacteria in our bodies than we are us, which is terrifying.
It's terrifying, but also like really good, because all those like leafy greens and stuff like that you're supposed to be good for you, you couldn't do that if you didn't have gut bacteria. You would literally wouldn't break it down. It would just go right through you. Right through you.
And just like how your gut health impacts basically everything about you.
Yeah, it literally directly is related to a lot of your immune health, which is fascinating. Which it's just fascinating how these gut microbes are literally helping us to function as humans. It's just really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's really crazy. We have that weird symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's how you got into it, but what exactly does a food scientist do? What's your typical, because there's sure lots of different food scientists and ways you can go with that, right? But what does your typical day look like, or what has it looked like in the past?
A lot of times I work, currently in my role, I'm a QA supervisor. I've been a QA manager, QA techs, and stuff like that, mainly on the quality assurance side of food.
QA meaning quality assurance.
Quality assurance, correct. Okay. A lot of times people that think that's just like making sure the food looks pretty. That is, when you make a product, you have specs and you want it to look a certain way. That's all well and good, but I'm always more interested in to make sure the food is safe for consumption. So it can look pretty, but is it safe is the main goal. And that's the way most manufacturers are really looking into nowadays, especially with the outbreaks and stuff that have happened before. I developed food safety plans, which FSP, just some acronyms. So essentially we work on designing and using HACCP, which is Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, which is a mouthful. But essentially we look at, you remember that movie Along Came Polly, long time ago, that movie?
Yeah.
And the guy was like a risk assessment person. He was like a risk adjustment for insurance companies.
Yeah.
That's essentially what we do with a HACCP plan. We look at all the possible things that can go wrong in a food system when you're making it. And we find nitty gritty. Oh, well, the sky could fall and this would happen.
How do we prevent it?
How do we stop it? So we essentially try to make sure that your food is safe. We mitigate, probable risks. We have to look in probability versus severity and just try to identify points where we can do more record keeping, do temperature control checks, things like that, to make sure that we have multi-step checks to make sure food is safe. So that's the stuff that I mainly work on. There's also people that literally do make the new flavors of stuff. I'm working with someone I work in an ice cream facility, and he works on making new ice cream flavors and stuff like that. So that's really so fun. I know. I already talked to him and I was like, hey, that would be fun.
Need one for me. Yeah.
Hey, you want to work on that? So yeah, there's a wide range of food scientists. There's food chemists. There's nutritionists. Like a lot of people who are in nutrition. That's a whole genre. There's wine makers, beer makers. Those are...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's all dairy scientists. And then a lot of people also are using food to try to help improve people's lives too. There's a lot of research on like green tea and anti-inflammatory effects and stuff like that. So there's a lot of research that's going on with that too.
So food science can look really different.
Correct.
And you specifically, your expertise are mostly in microbial presence in foods, quality assurance, making sure that it's safe for human consumption.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, well, since that's your expertise, good, because that's what we're talking about today. It's like I planned this. We're talking about food safety for the holidays, because it is always my goal to make it through the holiday season without barfing.
Good for you.
And that can be risky when you're eating at a lot of different people's houses. Much less the sickness is going around, but we won't even go there. Okay,
yeah, don't even talk about those. Don't even mention them, because then I'll inevitably get sick, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, shh.
At least for the food side of things, Sarah is going to lead us through how we take precautions. But first of all, if we don't take precautions with certain foods, what are the risks?
So, you can get sick. That's the main. You can get essentially what's called food poisoning. Everyone's heard of it. You get things like flu-like symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, coming out both ends sometimes. Not a fun time.
Been there. Yeah.
Been
literally
there.
Thought I was going to die.
I literally, so I had norovirus. I'm 90% sure, which if anyone doesn't know what that is, norovirus is like the cruise ship stomach bug that people always talk about. So that it runs rampant. It's highly contagious. A lot of times it's associated with seafood too.
Okay, hence the cruise thing.
And also it goes through cruises because everyone's in close quarters and eating the same kind of buffet. Usually on cruise ships there's buffets, so everyone's touching, eating the same kind of food, and it just goes rampant.
So food poisoning is just a catch-all term?
Yes, so food poisoning is like a catch-all term essentially, and you can get shigellosis, which is Shigella based food poisoning, but most people just call it food poisoning.
Shigellosis. Sounds like a dance.
Shigellosis. No one wants that. No. That's like, shigellosis is essentially like dysentery. You don't want that. I think we've all learned from playing like the Oregon Trail. You've died from dysentery. That's what that is.
Shigellosis.
Shigellosis. Again, honestly, they shouldn't have made the term so fun if it was, so
Agreed.
negative, right? So symptoms can last for usually can start anywhere from a couple hours. I usually say 4 to 6 for something like salmonella, or it can take like days. Mine was, when I got norovirus, it was like about 24 hours after I'd eaten something.
Yeah, I think mine was like 8, maybe.
That's
Maybe
probably
around 8.
Yours was probably, and so that makes sense because bacteria and viruses, viruses
Brewing
take
time.
the body a little while longer to notice because they're better hiders than bacteria
Oh, that
are.
makes sense. Yeah, mine was probably something like coli or salmonella. It was like with meat.
That's usually, my mom got trichinella from eating infected pork, and that's a parasitic infection. So.
Oh, yeah, they always say, is that, gross. So what's the most common types of food poisoning that people get? Is it usually salmonella?
Yeah, so normally it's salmonella, I think, or norovirus. So bacterial, it's almost always salmonella. But E. coli is a close second to that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we also have a lot of listeria outbreaks, too.
About that, like in the grocery store, recalls.
But yeah, I mean, not all salmonella and all E. coli are technically what's called pathogenic, which means that it's going to make you sick. So not all of them are bad.
Right.
Not all of them cause sickness.
And there's some E. coli strains that are worse than others, I know.
0157H7 is one of the main ones, which is a serotype for the type of E. coli. It's fascinating. That's another thing a lot of food scientists get into is epidemiology, too, which they are the ones that when some outbreak comes out, they're the ones that come in and look at the genetics of the organism and try to find out where exactly it came from. And they try to trace it through where other people have been sick and stuff like that, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's your main. Most of your symptoms are, though, most of the time, as we're both talking here, food science, and you're getting your food poisoning, it's not something you have to go to the hospital for. I had to go because I was so dehydrated that I passed out. But for the most part, it's not your tummy hurts or you're sick and throwing up and pooping all the time and for 24 hours. And then
I was
you're
going to say, some
usually
people, it's just, sometimes you're like, oh, I ate something that wasn't that great. And it's not so bad. It's literally just, But
right.
then
I had
I was like, I'm going to die.
I'm going to die. Like, I literally looked at my husband and was like, you're going to have to call an ambulance because I was like passing out in the bathroom.
Yeah. I was in the bathroom and I remember thinking that I absolutely understood how Elvis must have felt dying on the toilet because
you specifically were like, I am Elvis now. I get it, Elvis.
Yeah. In my dehydrated brain, I was like, this is it. Just like Elvis.
I'm going out. Again, the people that are most susceptible, pregnant ladies, but it's also people who are immunocompromised. That essentially means people whose immune system doesn't work as well as others. That can be because they have some sort of disorder or disease that causes them to be immunocompromised, such as like AIDS or things like that. Or they can take immunosuppressing medications, like I know some people that have autoimmune diseases take immunosuppressing medications. So those people are more likely at risk. Also, people who are older, their immune systems aren't as strong and robust.
And
Again,
babes.
The babes, the young. And then pregnant women are another priority with possibility of getting sick with food poisoning. So those are the groups that should be looking out for it the most.
Gotcha. Okay, so they're the people at risk. So how do we all make sure that we stay safe? So we've gone over what is poisoning. How do we prevent food poisoning this holiday?
So the main thing is to keep things clean when you're making stuff. Keep it clean, people, you know?
Keep it clean.
One of the main things that I always talk about with people is making sure you're washing your hands.
I feel like everybody who's listening is no crap, guys. But
yeah, like duh.
But also wash your
freaking
hands, because I've seen people out there making food. You're not washing them.
Right. And you're not washing them probably enough. Like everyone's like, I know, but did you actually do it? Like, no. Did you sing happy birthday twice? Did you sing happy birthday? You got the full 20 seconds, so hot soapy water in between all your fingers. I even go like, I'll take my fingernails and rake them. I rake them on my hand. Yeah, just to make sure I'm getting underneath the nails.
Shove that soap under there.
Get under there.
Well, and so instead of counting to 20, because I'm just like, I'm counting I think I'm counting
You're
fast,
like, 1, 2, 3,
so
4,
I
5,
just count to 30. I count to 30 to hedge my bets.
So, yeah, that one seems pretty obvious. And a lot of these things seem pretty obvious, but like I try to remember that when you're in the thick of it, when you're cooking something, like a full meal.
When you're in the trenches.
When you're in the trenches.
To wash your hands.
And I literally do this all the time. I'll be like, get people out of my kitchen. Like if Nathan or Penny is in the kitchen with me, I'm like, just go. Because I need all the space. And I'm moving from thing to thing. But I'm also constantly thinking, oh, I just touched eggs. Better go wash my hands. I am constantly washing my hands and drying them. I go through a full paper towel roll making almost everything because I'm constantly stopping and washing my hands. The other thing is make sure your food contact surfaces are really, really clean. So I always clean before and after starting like a meal. So
I need to clean up more after the counters. The splash, just in case. I'm really good about wiping down if I did the meat there, but I feel like I'm not as good about if something splashed in the sink. What if it splashed out of the sink and cleaning out the sink?
Right. So I try to make sure that, and that's why I do a before and after cleaning. So that way I wipe down everything before to make sure that nothing since the last time I cooked has gotten it on the surface at all. Yeah. However that is. And then I also make sure I wipe down. Clorox wipes, 409, anything like that'll be perfect to use with this type of situation. And then just make sure when I say food contact surfaces, that's not just your counters. That's also making sure your knives are clean and your cutting boards. I know and this is my food science nerdy, when I was putting on my wedding registry, there was one item that I wanted the most, and it was a set of cutting boards that were separated and had little pictures on them of this one's for beef, this one is for fish, this one is for ready to eat items, and this one is for vegetables. So, that I loved having that because it kept everything separate.
And what kind of cutting boards are they, material wise? It's
like plastic personally. Wood makes me nervous because it's very porous. Doesn't mean you can't use them. It's just, this is all about risk reward kind of thing. This is all about mitigating as much risk as you can to decrease the probability number. So your likeliness to get sick. So, I would definitely have at least 2 types of cutting boards in your house. At least have a raw one
and one for.
I would do a raw meat one specifically, and then one for other things. I prefer I like having 3 because I like my ready to eat items. If I'm going to cut pizza, I always take pizza out and put it on a cutting board and then slice it. I don't want that to be on raw produce or raw meat. Because ready to eat, or RTE, is your highest risk because there's no processing done to it before you eat it.
Right, you're not washing it, you're not cooking it.
You're not washing it, you're not cooking it, you're not baking it, boiling it, steaming it, and you're not doing anything to it that possibly would mitigate your risk by reducing your pathogens. Yeah. And then the other thing to look into is when even your fruits and vegetables, I always rinse them under water, cool water, and brush some of the dirt off if I see dirt, and to make sure they're dried before I use them, just in case, to get some of that cleaning step. And they're already technically washed most of the time in a processing facility, but make sure they get cleaned. The things you don't want to rinse before you make them are your raw meats. Don't wash. Tom the turkey doesn't need a bath before you get him ready for baking, because you're more likely to do more harm than good. What I mean by that is, like when you were talking about earlier about, I'm not sure if my sink's clean or what around my sink splashes. That's the thing, is if you put Tom in for a dip, it's going to splash regardless of, and I don't know about you, but I have a lot of my clean dishes right beside my sink, kind of drying. So every time I also think of this, I also think of Monsters Inc. when he's like, we have a 2319. That's every time we have an issue. Just don't bathe your turkey. There's no need for it. All you're going to do is
rinse your meat.
Or even chicken or anything. All you're going to do is just cross-contaminate something else, which cross-contaminate means you put something that was raw meat-wise usually, and now your bowl that you're going to eat your salad in, it's got turkey juice in it. No one wants that.
Ew. Well, and then so this brings us into, so what, you've gone grocery shopping, you get your stuff, you get home. How do you prevent cross-contamination once you're in your kitchen? Besides just obviously don't chop stuff on the same board, you know what I mean?
Correct. I try to prep things on separate surfaces if you can do that, but also just be mindful. Like if I'm chopping my vegetables, I usually keep my meat completely segregated. And if I touch my vegetables and then go to meat, it's not a big deal. But if I go for meat or eggs or things like more high-risk items, I don't go right back to my raw ingredients then. That's a no-no.
Unless I know I will touch the raw vegetables with my meat hands if they're going in with the meat kind of thing, right? Like you're going to cook it all together.
If you're going to cook it all together and stuff like that's fine. Even if you can stress less if you're going to steam the vegetables then. Because the steaming and the cooking and the processing like that should help with and mitigate all that risk.
And the cooking.
And the steaming, the cooking, the prepping. But once you do all that kind of stuff, that should mitigate that risk. Now, if you are taking your raw meat and then you're going to prep your salad, that's not a good idea. And, some things that we're still learning about food science, a lot of people didn't realize it, but flour is now
right? Like, I can't stop thinking about that. Now that, like, there's
right, because you should...
All of a sudden, flour started getting crap in it.
Salmonella. Yep. They've realized that salmonella, when it's under stress, can survive dry environments, which flour is very dry. People thought there's no way anything can survive in flour. It's not really, doesn't have a lot of nutrients, really dry. But yes, salmonella has been found in it. So that's another thing, even in your baking. If you've got flour dust everywhere, like you have to remember, okay, I'm going to put this in the oven now. Now, don't take your pie out that you've just cooked and put it on a floury countertop because you could have possibly cross-contaminated it.
Yay. And that's because of the facilities the flour is made in?
It could have come from the mills themselves in a processing situation, or these are things that are found in the environment everywhere.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Salmonella's in soil sometimes, right?
Yeah, soil. Everyone's, how did you bring it in here? It's just that technically it's everywhere. And these organisms have been living here way before us. They're just surviving. They're doing their own little thing. It's just the fact that they got somewhere that they weren't supposed to. We didn't have enough cleaning mitigations and ways to stop it from enumerating or growing to a volume that we can't now pass on to ourselves. Because that's the other thing too. It's not even that there's salmonella present, because it doesn't mean you're going to get sick. It's all about the number of cells that you ingest too.
Yeah, that's
certain
right.
Shigella, when we talk shigellosis, that's only like 100 cells or something like that you can get. It's a really low inoculation number that will, once you have those certain, I think it's like 100 cells or something like that, it's dunzo. You're going to get sick. Yeah. But salmonella, like you said, you're like, I'm constantly in salmonella. It's because you probably didn't get a high enough enumeration of them or colony numbers in your colon to really mess stuff up. So yeah, that's the main thing, is to, as you're prepping your food, try to keep it separate, keep it clean.
Got it.
The other things are to make sure you're cooking it properly. If you're going to cook a turkey, you want to make sure your internal temperature is 165. And everyone's like, do I need a meat thermometer? I would suggest yes. I honestly.
The answer is yes.
Yes. The answer is yes. Unless I know a lot of these turkeys now come up with those little indicators.
Oh,
Have you seen the little poppers?
Listeners, I just want to tell you that at one point I was like, Sarah, is this safe? And Sarah said, just poke it with your finger in several different places. And if your finger burns, then it's done. I proceeded to do that and then burned my fingers. Because I didn't have a thermometer. Sarah was like, poke it. If it hurts, it's probably cooked. My own little meat thermometer, which was my finger.
Well, because you were desperate. You called me and you're like, Sarah, I just made this and I don't know if it's done.
You're like, poke your finger in. I come back with like 3rd-degree burns.
It was done, wasn't it? It was done.
And I didn't get sick.
That is not my scientific.
Don't do that, listeners. Just tell your best friend that.
Honestly, thermometer is where you want it. Where it's at. Especially.
That makes sense. I used to have one and then I broke and then I never got it. But I should get a new one. They're like on sale everywhere these days.
Right. At the very least, if you're going to do a turkey, get the ones with the little poppers on them. So when that pops up, that's usually in the thickest part of the bird where she's real thick. That it pops.
2 C's.
2 C's, everyone. 2 C's. It'll pop. And then that'll tell you that it's reached the internal temperature that is suggested by the FDA at 165. You want to do a couple different places, which is what I told you about making sure it was in a couple different places. You want to make sure you at least get your innermost part of the thigh, because thigh meat has a hard time cooking with that, and the wing, because thigh's thick. Yeah. And then you want to make sure you really shove it in the breast. That's what I was going to say. Shove it. That's going to be your main thing because it's the thickest part. This also is cautionary for your stuffing. If you're going to stuff that bird, and you want to eat that stuffing, that needs to be at 165 as well. Okay. Because I know when we were having Thanksgiving, they pulled it out and were like, oh, it's at 163. I'm like, is that 165?
Put it back in.
I was like, put it back in. It's not done. So that they really do suggest not to prepare your stuffing in the bird. But if it's like, well, we've always done it that way.
Yeah.
The best to
just make it get hot enough.
Really want to heat that sucker up.
What are these temperature goals accomplishing for the?
So they're essentially killing off most of that bacteria that's going to make you sick. Salmonella can survive drying, but heat, it's not its friend. Especially you're cooking a turkey for 4 hours. That's a long time, and that's excessive drying. 165 is the suggested. That should kill off everything that's going to make you sick.
Can you mess around more with certain, let's say, for those of us that do eat meat, I obviously weighing risk and cost benefit of like, if I want red meat, like I like my steak medium rare, obviously it might have risks to it. But is there meat that is more risky than others to not cook properly?
Yes. Poultry is going to be pretty high risk. That is just because of the way it's processed in facilities. Also, anything ground. So if you've got your ground meat, that is your number one risk. Because when you are cutting and slicing your meat from the carcass, there's a knife that goes through and slices. So when that slice comes through, if it's like a steak piece, imagine it's your two surfaces that are going to be the parts that contaminated, because they're the main contamination points. But so that way, that's how you can have your rare, like medium rare steaks, is because you're searing those outside edges to a high enough temperature to kill the contamination points. Now, if you ground that meat, take that steak and you put it through a grinder, the outsides are all mushing in with the insides, creating this ground beef. Now the whole thing has been contaminated with whatever was on the outside. That's the one you do not order your burger.
Okay, So don't eat
I would never suggest to do such a thing like that. That's probably your most high risk item is ground turkey, ground beef,
like sausage,
pork. Yeah. So those are your more at risk items. And then your lower risk items would be stuff that's already been preheated, ham, or like hot dogs, if you think about it, technically have been processed to some point. Now, I'm not saying
like whenever
go
you
around
buy things that say pre-cooked, right?
pre-cooked.
Like
those are going to be less risky because they've already undergone some sort of thermal treatment, some sort of way that makes sure that they are less at risk. So those are, and your ready to eat foods are going to be obviously way less risk than stuff that requires preparation.
Alrighty. And then anything else to make sure that we can stay safe? We did clean, separate, cook.
Clean, cook, chill. How you take care of your foods after. What we're talking about, those 4 steps, which are you make sure your things are clean, make sure you keep things separate, make sure you cook them through, and make sure you have a chill or refrigeration step. Those are all suggested by the FDA. If you want to make sure that once you've cooked your food, that's great. But it doesn't mean it's completely safe then unless you get it back into a place where you can control growth, if anything is present. So say you have something and you've cooked it and you bring it out. There's air molecules coming through. There's people walking by. There's someone who sneezed before they got to the turkey. There's all these things that are, while it's sitting out, can become contaminated at some point with something. Oh, I went and dug my fork in to get this one piece, or I picked off the skin off the turkey before anyone came through. Whatever your family does, or it just existing in the outside air with no cover can have a possible risk.
So when does the clock start? The clock starts when it comes out of the oven.
Correct. One of my favorite things the FDA calls it is called the danger zone. You want to keep food out of the danger zone. So that's essentially like room temperature is danger zone. So you don't want to keep it in the danger zone for too long. If you keep it in there, I would say you got about 2 to 4 hours is usually what they suggest. So on the safe side, I would say 2 hours. So that includes like your pumpkin pie. So like you got a pie, you made it. If you bring it out and sit it out or whatever like that, doesn't mean you have to put your pie completely back in the fridge, but I would cover it and make sure it's properly maintained. These are things you want to make sure that, and you make sure that your refrigerator is set at 40 or less.
Yeah.
What it's called the danger zone is that's when the organisms are happy. They have food because they're on food. They have water because the food has water in it. The air temperature is now warm. Cozy. They're happy. Yeah, they're like, you got me a snack. And
danger zone is also the cozy zone.
Yeah. Everyone watch out, it's a cozy zone.
That sounds delightful. Everyone's like,
what's a cozy zone?
No.
I want one. Yeah. No, it's not the hugs. No hugs for them. So essentially you want to make sure that your organisms are not happy. You put them in states where they're not happy, aka the extreme heat or the cold. There's an acronym that's ridiculous. It's called Fat Tom. I'm not kidding you.
What?
Yeah, it's called Fat Tom. I can't remember what all the letters mean, but it's all about the stuff that makes organisms happy. It's like, moisture, the acidity, the temperature, the time, things like that. Things that make an organism grow and make more organisms. Because when you're happy, you get down to business and you make more.
Yeah. When you get cozy.
When you get in that cozy zone, you know what's happening. We get enumeration, baby. That's what you get. You get enumeration. So if that's why you want to try to take one of the things that make the organism happy, essentially, or grow, is you want to take those out. So you try to pluck out. You can't change how, that it has food because it is food. Yeah, it's the food you've already prepared. Can't change the acidity. Can't really change the moisture of it anymore. You've already baked it. You're not changing those items, but you can change how long it sits out in the open and at what temperature it's at. So that's why they say get it back in the fridge. Organisms are going to be cold. They're not going to want to grow. They're kind of like...
And I feel like that is at both ends of this. So let's say you get your turkey, you get it out of the oven, and your clock starts ticking because the temperature is slowly reaching room temperature.
Right, which it won't start instantly necessarily because it's still hot. So it'll plateau for a little bit and then it'll start going down.
Yeah. So you might have
And
a
then
little
when
more than
you,
two.
so then it'll start like, okay, so say your organisms are here as you're cooking, and then it drops, right? You get a low number, get a low number. And then, okay, now I've taken it out of the oven, it's starting to cool, and I get a higher number, and starts getting higher. As soon as you put it in that fridge, it kind of pauses it. It doesn't kill it.
Go away. Yeah.
It doesn't instantly kill it. It just stops it. Stops the clock at wherever you were. Now, what's important is then you take it out and you reheat it. That'll go back down then for enumeration numbers. So that'll take your organisms back down to after you've essentially cooked it, as long as you cook it long enough and get it to hopefully at around 165 again.
Yeah.
Now, am I saying,
same with the fridge? Like, let's say you have something, a trifle, whatever, and something with dairy. It's cold. You bring it out of the fridge. You've got 2 hours. It starts to warm.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, what was the other question that I had about?
Oh yeah, make sure when you thaw your stuff, please do not just lay them on the counter and thaw them. There's basically 3 methods of thawing that are deemed acceptable. In the fridge, microwaving it, and which is why your microwaves have that little defrost section on there.
Thank the Lord, because Laura can never remember to pull it out a day or 2 ahead of time.
Or you can, what I usually do is if I've forgotten to pull it out and it's something that's not going to be too bad, I'll take running cool water.
Right, like shrimp. Like if it's like frozen shrimp, I'll do that with.
Right, you don't want to put it on hot water and start cooking it because that's going to affect your flavor profiles and everything. And also, if it has organisms in it, you're already starting your cooking process and you might put it in that danger zone then because it was frozen. Now you're warming it too warm and not reaching that high point. So yeah, I would say that those are your 3 methods. Thawing in the fridge, thawing it under cool running water, not hot, cool running water, or using your microwave settings. So yeah, that's
chill thaw-wise, and then chill
after preparing.
Cooking or refrigeration, like either or. It's got to be, you put it away. And then how long, like how you put it, is there a specific way to store the food that's better than another way?
I mean, you want to try to put it in like sealable containers. That would be your best bet. Covering it to like aluminum foil, plastic wrap. Those I would say are your, like, again, it's a spectrum. So we're your best would be
airtight.
Airtight sealed container. Then I would say it's covered with aluminum foil and plastic wrap around. And then would be I threw the plate in there. Like, that would be my least suggested method. But, I mean, at least it's in there and not on the counter. So, I mean,
that's true.
One step up.
And then how long are most leftovers good for? Or it depends on the food?
It depends on the food. I usually say 3 to 4 days. I would say 3 max. So, 3 to 4.
Yeah.
It depends on the food. If it's a higher risk.
I was just going to say, what are some higher risk foods that you're like,
it's
not playing with that one?
The same thing with what's your high risk foods in general. I would say meat, I'm a little bit more wary of keeping 4-5 days. Like, I wouldn't mess around with meat just because it's a high risk item. Also, I wouldn't really keep, if I made scrambled eggs, why would I keep scrambled eggs? I wouldn't. But if you say you made scrambled eggs and you wanted to keep them, that's one I wouldn't let sit around for a while either. And that's a great place to jump onto FDA's website. They have your high-risk food items on there in general. So they'll tell you
like eggs, meat, dairy.
Meat, dairy. I would say eggs, meat, dairy are your main ones. I think we talked about all the... Oh, yeah, and also... when in doubt, throw it out.
That I've thrown out because it smelled funky.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of great FDA things. If you are just curious about food, you can call 1-888-SAFE-FOOD, which is the FDA's. But there's also a USDA meat and poultry hotline that you can also call, which is 1-888. Can
you even imagine how many phone calls
MP hotline
over the holidays? I think my turkey is not done. How do I know? Just the amount of phone calls that people must.
Right.
They're just the Sarah. I thank goodness I have you. Otherwise, I'd be calling the hotline.
Yeah.
I just bought these yogurts and I forgot about it. And I think it's been out for an hour, but it could have been 3. So with all the precautions we just talked about, what if you don't follow them? We talked about you get food poisoning and you vomit and you poop your guts out. Is it the worst of the worst? Because some people are like, I mean, if you're hedging your bets, if you're like, I have played the gamble of how much did this take me to cook versus how bad do I think the repercussions will be?
Absolutely. So, and that's the whole, people used to call it the raw cookie dough test. So raw cookie dough tastes amazing. And back in our day, it had raw eggs in it. And it was like, do I eat it still? Right. And there's a lot of people that are like, absolutely, yeah, I eat raw cookie dough.
Worth the poops, worth that poop.
Worth it, right. It comes down to a risk thing. Okay, so the most likely scenario if you're going to get sick is going to be you're not going to feel good for 24 hours, 48 hours. I think my norovirus was like 72 hours.
I was going to say mine was at least 2 days.
Yeah. So but that's because we were younger, healthier, we were not immunocompromised. People die from this. Like, people do die. I was just hearing today that someone was saying that one of the operators at where I work got salmonella, and he was in the hospital for 4 days. So it just depends, and you're rolling the dice, technically. It's kind of with the car scenario. If I'm driving a car, if I keep swerving lanes, I'm more likely to get hit by a car. And if I get in a car accident, is it going to be a fatal one?
Right. And then too, like, this is such like it's not just a modern day problem, right? But I feel like there are differences between back in the day. Of course, these problems were really scary because we didn't know as much about them. But now, even though we know as much about them, our food goes through so many more hands than it did before, which has so many more points of contamination. Like, there's just so many more points.
Right.
But thankfully, there's people.
But a lot more people are doing. Right. There's a lot more regulation. And in fact, a lot of the most common, like, recalls and FDA investigations that are going on right now are not from necessarily, like, outbreaks. They're like, I feel 5-10 years ago, we were talking about every time we got a recall event or an investigation done by the FDA, it was almost always, salmonella, E. coli, or listeria. Like, it blew up.
Yeah.
Now
like
it's right. There's the cantaloupes with listeria. It was everywhere. And then the past couple of years, it's been all about undeclared allergens. That's where we're getting a lot more focus, which is just suggesting that our food safety plans that are in place in a lot of our facilities and a lot of our businesses are actually working. We are identifying risks. We are mitigating it. I actually was talking to someone today. Everyone's on this train about we must buy local, and I'm all for that. But also you have to remember that yes, you're buying local and it's less hands like you're looking at it, but I'm also looking at it that there are less hands, there's less people to check on it too. There's less rules. There's actually even less rules and regulations for farmers market foods. Things that are not produced to a certain quantity or sell a certain amount don't fall under certain jurisdictions of the FDA. Right.
So you'd have to really do your homework.
You really have to trust
a farmer. Or you just have to mitigate yourself as much as possible rather than relying on the manufacturer.
Right. And you have to trust your farmers and stuff like that. Make sure that they're not literally dealing with cow manure and then going and milking the cow.
Butchering stuff.
Yeah, butchering stuff. There are reasons certain things are in place to protect us. It's all about balance. It's all about, same thing with diet, same thing with almost everything. Everything boils down to balance, I feel like.
Yeah.
I know. It's not what you want to hear. I know.
Not what I want to hear for the holidays. Excess. Capitalism. That's what the holidays are. Nothing in balance. Are you kidding me? I'm going to barf I'm going to eat till I barf.
And I'm like,
but for good reasons,
balance.
Not for food poisoning. Yeah.
Right. Just because you're full and your brain didn't tell you to stop eating.
Yeah.
Not because you're going to get sick.
I think that covers it. I had one final question I didn't put on your question.
Oh, so surprise question. Perfect.
A surprise question. My surprise question is, what is your favorite holiday food at this time of year to eat?
It's got to be Christmas cookies.
You're like, cookies. 100%.
It's cookies. 100%.
Give me those cookies. Any specific cookie? Like sugar cookie?
No.
I'm just saying.
No.
Because some people are like, oh, Christmas cookies. You mean like the decorated cookies. It doesn't matter about me. I'm talking about for our listeners.
I'm saying, well, you know what my favorite cookie is, don't you? It's the one I make every year. My chocolate chip.
Famous chocolate chip ones.
Yeah, my famous chocolate chip ones that my grandmother taught me to make.
Yeah. Man, a good Christmas cookie. Mm-hmm. Although, listeners, Sarah made some really, really good wet nuts, which I actually can't stop thinking about them.
Well, I'm gonna try to make them again for our New Year's get together, the one in January we're doing, and I'm gonna try to make them less wet this time.
They were pretty good wet. All right. Well, on that note,
on wet nuts.
On the wet nuts note, everybody who's listening, happy holidays, because those of you who celebrate Christmas, it's Christmas Eve. Be prepared for the holidays. Happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, happy holidays to everybody. And tune in next week because we're going to have more of Katie and I's bog banter. If you want to find out cool stuff for bogs, 'tis the season for bogs as well. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining me, Sarah.